Tell me about the sort of the beginnings of this. How did this start?
Yeah, so it began by a group of pastors trying to get together and saying, we don't think that we have to line up on either sides of this issue and have that be the defining piece of who we are. And so we built out a group of pastors all across the U.S., from Silver Springs, Maryland to Oakland, right out by you. We had pastors in that group, an initial group of about 13, some of whom were full out affirming, and others who were very traditional and unabashedly so. And yet, this group was willing to say, we still think there's space for each other here in the Christian Reformed Church. We don't think that this has to be our dividing issue. We don't have to walk through a divorce over this particular distinctive. And so that group started meeting, started on Zoom. We started to see if there was resonance across the denomination for some of that. And so we engaged others in kind of a wider leadership circle around an advisory council. Members who joined that, again, who were very affirming, and others who were very traditional on sexuality. But again, saying, okay, if I think that I'm going to end up in heaven with you, Paul, and we pray, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, then what are we doing to help bring that here? And part of this conversation is trying to do just that, trying to bring that beauty of that Revelation 7 into the moment across these dividing polarities. And so we had others join us. Colin Watson, the former executive director of the denomination, is on our advisory council. We've got other folks, Peter Yonker from LaGrave, very kind of classically Christian Reformed congregation, large church here in Grand Rapids. We've got people, again, all across the nation as part of that. We wanted to be sensitive. I don't know how many viewers you have up north of the border, but we wanted to be sensitive. Yeah, we wanted to be sensitive to the conversation within the Christian Reformed Church around binationality. And so we've held an invitational posture to our Canadian brothers and sisters. I was born, I'm a dual citizen card. And so I love my Canadian siblings. But we've held a very invitational posture there. We didn't want to come off as colonial in any of this, and recognizing that they're in a very distinctly different cultural context than we are in the US also. So, and then we just started, sharing the existence, sharing the vision. We built a website. We put together an email list. We got a one-page ad in the banner that caused some consternation. And we just kind of kept calling people to a higher vision of building that unity across difference for the sake of mission. We're not the best organized. We're not the best initially funded group. We started with $0 in the bank, and kind of built it as we went, really out of passion for Christ Church, and wanting to see that kind of eschatological reality bear fruit in our midst. So,
well, talk to me a little bit. We'll get into some of the pragmatics in a bit, but talk to me a little bit about the structure. How are you structured? Do you have officers? Did you have a 501c3? Tell me a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what this thing is.
Yeah. So, we started meeting over Zoom. There was no, We weren't incorporated. We weren't 501c3'd. We were very much a concept and a hope. After we got up and running, after the website, after some of those pieces fell into place, we were able to raise some dollars, which was welcome. And you know, the reality is that being online does cost money.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Nope. It's pretty nimble. It's right. It's pretty nimble. It's pretty agile. But so we started doing that. We had Calvin Christian Reformed Church here in town in Grand Rapids willing to hold the donations that came in, and they were willing to set up an account for us that way. As we got going, as we started to build some presence, we were encouraged to consider applying for a grant from the Lilly Endowment. They had a Thriving Congregations Initiative, and the application was kind of a hope and a prayer. And we put that together pre-Synod 2023 while we were kind of issuing this call and this invite to the denomination that we were members of, loved, and cared for. And so we went into Synod 2023 hoping that there would be space allowed for folks who view these things differently. And as you've covered in other places, and people can look all that up, right? That space really wasn't afforded. And that was something that I think as a group of Better Together, we lamented. We were disappointed by, because again, we live in a complex context. Likely every congregation has people who view these things differently. And I'm concerned that the workings of Synod and the movement of the denomination is such that even your run-of-the-mill member in your local CRC church, if they view things differently on sexuality, they will no longer be welcome. We're not there yet. I'd hope we wouldn't get there. But it's hard for me to see an avenue forward that doesn't include something like that.
So what was the size of the and the grant that you received from Lilly?
Yeah, that was so like I said, we submitted that right along with Synod 23. It's one of these things where it feels like the longest Hail Mary pass, right? Because you let it go in June and you hear crickets. And we didn't hear anything till mid-November. When all of a sudden we got an email that said, "Hey, we've decided to award you this grant." And so it's sizable. Yeah, we're very blessed by it, and we're excited for what it allows for.
Well, but that's my question, which is, because I mean, I have a little YouTube channel. I didn't have any startup funds. I mean, and so I know that initially there was a $5,000 grant from Classis Grand Rapids East to help get this going, and then this other grant is over $1 million. And if Lilly granted me $1 million to do something in the Christian Reformed Church, I'm hard pressed to think of how I would spend that money. So I'm really curious about what the plans are.
Yeah. So I should be clear here, Paul. We did this in conjunction with Calvin Christian Reformed Church, and so Calvin is officially the grantee of these funds. They're the official grantee. We are the partner through which they are working to work this out.
Okay.
And so yes, it's a very generous grant. We feel blown away. We're very humbled by it. Lilly, in this round, only granted 10 or 11% of the grants they received. And they granted 105, I think, was the total number of grants in this round.
Okay.
So it was highly competitive. And you have to come to that then with a pretty distinct business plan.
Right.
Our application was 50 or 60 pages long.
Right. And I get to that, I really want to hear, well, what are you actually planning to do with a grant that large? Because, I mean, you can have employees. I mean, to have a web presence, I mean, any of us, $100 and a Squarespace, or,
And that's
a
how
web,
we started.
right, right. And
Yep.
it doesn't take a lot. And if you're going to have a really nice one, maybe a little bit of a web developer if you can't find a volunteer, et cetera, et cetera. But a grant this size towards an end like this, where in many ways I would have thought an effort like this probably should have started in 2013. Because of course there was that study committee that led up to 2016 that led to that. And then of course, none of us anticipated COVID, but I've been talking about these confessional conversations since 2012. I started blogging about it because it seemed pretty clear that we were heading towards an impasse. And just looking at what had happened in other denominations, this impasse was going to be serious, at least as serious as women in office. And so now, okay, so the organization's kind of late to the game. It's starting from a classis that, as you say, as we talked about, has a reputation. And I agree with you. Its classis Grand Rapids East is far more complex than the reputation that it has. But now, I mean, in some ways, whereas on one hand, yeah, those kinds of resources are certainly an attractive advantage because you can do a lot of things that, let's say, a group of volunteers can't do. And so then my question is, do you have a plan for this? I'm super curious about this plan because at least at this point, it seems like the odds are pretty long given what we've seen in the last two synods.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess let me describe the project a little bit itself. It is, I think it's important to note a couple of things. So the project itself is an effort to help build unity across difference for the sake of mission. That's the tagline: unity across difference for the sake of mission. Boom. The reality is that this project is not limited to Christian Reformed churches. It is not limited to only the polarizing issue of sexuality. And it is not intended to simply create a whole bunch of moderates or centrists. I think that's a misconception sometimes of the better together language.
Okay.
If our tagline is unity across difference for the sake of mission, difference is important there, right? We're not trying to mute that. We're not trying to convince people off of their convictions. And so what the project allows for is churches and congregations who recognize that they're going to have heavy lifts in their future, regardless of what that looks like, whether they're in the CRC, whether they leave the CRC, whether they were never part of the CRC, but they were RCA, or they were the Baptist church down the street. We live in a polarized world, and we all are going to have heavy lifts around this issue of polarization. And what the project allows for is, the project in many ways is kind of like your local gym. If you've got to lift heavy items, let's train you so that you can lift them well. And so the project is an invitation for congregations to join in about a 2.5-year experience where their leaders will be equipped, supported, encouraged, coached. They'll go on retreat. Their congregation will engage in particular trainings. And then in a cohort model, their church, along with 6 or 8 others, will engage in a missional output. And that's really the general scope of the project itself. we're going to be able to provide that training, coaching, equipping, those retreats for a very minimal cost to local participant congregations. We're going to be able to support them with staff people. And so I serve as the project director for this, which means that Better Together has just in the last month or so bought out half of my time from Fuller. Dee Recker, who reached out to you, is serving as one of our staff members too. We brought on Jessica Maddox and Kenzie Skapansky, and these folks who are really high octane individuals with a passion to see that unity built across difference for the sake of mission. And so over the course of the next 3 years or so, we'll be building about 7 cohorts of 6 to 8 churches apiece. So about 50 congregations will be able to participate, scattered across the US, hopefully in local geographies. And then together, those congregations will identify a particular leader from each. That principal leader will gather in a cohort model on a monthly basis to engage curriculum, build relationship, navigate difference. We'll bring, one of our partners in this is the Colossian Forum here in Grand Rapids. And so we'll bring trainers to them in their location, where they'll go through 2 different trainings. One is a wayfinder training, where they engage how to have these contentious conversations well. And so they practice different postures. They encourage curiosity rather than kind of confrontation. They ask people to, when you come up against conflict, rather than react and recoil, you actually get closer and you engage. And so those trainings will be on location in those local geographies. And then the chief metric in all of this, though, really is an effort to say, can we then actually practice what we've been working on in some kind of a missional output, right? Whether that's kind of evangelistic or diaconal or whatever it may be. And so we're hoping, and our goal is to see these congregations rally around a missional piece in such a way that they're able to engage in their local setting and show that Revelation 7 vision and show the Church of God working together across difference in pretty tangible ways.